TJ asks, Aaron, what's your preference, dome tweeter or compression driver?
Well, technically it says doom tweeter, so I don't like any tweeter that's.
Is that a new type?
I don't have a tweeter. Yeah, I don't have a favorite, honestly. They both have their pros and cons, so I don't really have a favorite. I think compression drivers might have a little bit more dynamic range. Usually they're in a horn loaded waveguide, and so the directivity is more well controlled, typically over like just a tweeter or a flat dome or a dome. I'm sorry, on a flat baffle. And so domes on flat baffles usually will get a little bit. This is generally speaking, we usually get a little bit wider in sound radiation, so that's a plus for me personally. But they're also typically going to have issues with diffraction, where the sound waves that go all around and like hit the edge of the speaker will come reflected back to your listening position, and they'll be a little bit out of phase, so they'll create like a dip on axis. And the more you go off axis, or the more you turn the speaker away from you, the less severe that dip is. But the problem is the difference in direct to reflected sound could be enough to create problems. And usually what I notice is that it results in like a boosted tweeter region, not the overall level, but it's usually between like 4 to 6 kilohertz, depending on the size of the baffle. And then the tweeter that's back for dome tweeters on a flat baffle. Dome tweeters on a flat baffle usually will start to increase or decrease in radiation a little bit more sooner than a waveguide speaker. And the reason is because they're broader at the lower frequencies, but around like 8 kilohertz for a 1-inch dome tweeter, it'll start to tighten up. So you won't have as much room reflection. It'll be more direct. And that may sound good, but generally what I find is that it results kind of in a less spacious sound. The flip side of that is compression drivers, which are waveguided or horn-loaded waveguided. They will start off a little bit more narrow, and they'll just continue that same consistency throughout. So at the lower tweeter range, the upper mid-range frequencies, they may not be as wide, but they are still sometimes a little bit wider than a dome tweeter on a flat baffle. It just depends.
But here's a question. Would you say that there's an audible difference between like tweeter material? Like when you say beryllium tweeter, is there an inherent, like,
there can be.
Oh, it usually sounds like this. Aluminum, it usually sounds like this. Soft dome, are there characteristics that you find are consistent?
Yeah, there can be, but most manufacturers have learned how to deal with that. So that doesn't seem this. It doesn't carry the same way as it used to before. Okay,
so it's not like, you hear some people say, oh, this has a metallic sound.
Yeah, no.
Is that
it's not like that anymore
or not?
Yeah, no, like metal domes like will break up a little bit sooner in frequency, and they'll break up a little bit later in frequency, but they'll break up kind of strong. And so you would hear those breakups. And so that's where that comes from, right? People are like, oh, a metal dome sound X, Y, or Z. Well, they used to, back when designers couldn't work around the issues, or they couldn't maybe break up the resonances and the modal issues and push them out a little bit further in frequency. But it's really not like that anymore. So when people say that now, it's just based on like how things used to be, right? Like people sometimes will still say that horn speakers are, that's what I'm looking for here.
Horny.
Yeah.
Hornish.
They're horny. You're right. Yeah. But it's not like that anymore, because what that came from is like back in the day when you would see like the horn systems, they'd be a big old waveguide at a ballpark, and all you hear like, right? They don't sound like that anymore, but people still have that in their head that they think that they do. And in my experience, and this is the truth, a lot of people who say like, well, metal tweeters sound like this or horn speakers sound like this, it's either they're older and that's how it used to sound for real, and they just don't know that speakers have changed and gotten better, or they're too new to understand that they don't need to listen to the people who are still stuck in the past. And that's really what I've experienced.
So I posted this article on my channel. Let's see. Yeah.
But to talk about what you're like, I definitely noticed the difference going from the horn speaker to that electrostat.
Yeah.
So, different. I definitely think, like, I wouldn't say like if it's an aluminum, it sounds more metallic or anything like that. But there is definitely, especially with I notice it more with female voices and organic instruments, violins, a lot of stringed instruments. Like there's like more of a delicate quality to them going from the horn to the electrostat, and a little bit, and it's slightly, it's harder to hear. It's definitely hard to hear, but there is a difference between the materials when they're using them. What's an AMT or a ribbon, like an actual ribbon, right? Not a sandwich ribbon, whatever. Yeah, sandwich would be good. I haven't eaten anything all day.
Would be good. Yeah. So I definitely agree with you in that. Like if you're talking about especially like different designs, because implementation is key. But I was thinking more along the lines of like, if you took this speaker and you put a metal dome tweeter in it, and then you switch it out with a silk cloth tweeter or something like that, then on its own, it could sound different. But if somebody goes in and says, well, there's a peak here, and we're going to put a notch filter at like 10K or something, then that issue is resolved. So it's not really as much of an issue as it might have been back in the day when they didn't do that kind of stuff.
They'd also have to redesign the crossover for that material as well.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
Majority of the two-way speakers I've seen and reviewed that have an aluminum tweeter, the crossover is lower, like closer, like anywhere in between 1,800 to 2,000. Whereas like the Andrew Jones Carinas that I heard at CES, he's like, oh yeah, 2,500 or 2,400 is the crossover point for those due to the material,
Yeah, so stuff like that definitely matters.
So the interesting thing is that a lot of the differences that you see are obvious in a frequency response graph. Like this is something basic, like the Martin Logans that you had before, Chana, like they really did measure differently because of the way it interacted with your room, right? So it wasn't like, I could tell because of the property. No, it was just actually like easy to measure.
Right. It wasn't something subjective like, the angels are a little bit louder.
Yeah, right. Pretty obviously different in the way it interacted with your room. Now,
All right, everybody, we do the Daily HiFi podcast every Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So make sure you join up to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Daily HiFi, and we will see you there for the big show every Monday. Yeah.